At 2:45 in the morning on August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber rolled down the runway at Northfield on Tinian Island in the Pacific Ocean. The plane was heavy, heavier than a normal B-29 should be. The runway was long, and the night was dark and warm. The pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets, held the controls steady as the aircraft lifted off the ground and climbed into the black sky over the Pacific. In the bomb bay, a single weapon hung from its release mechanism. It weighed 9,700 pounds, was 10 feet long, and 29 inches in diameter. It had been painted olive drab. Someone had written messages on its casing in chalk. The weapon had a name: Little Boy. Most of the 12 men aboard the plane had no idea what it was. 6 hours later, 80,000 people would be dead. The story of the Hiroshima bombing does not start on Tinian Island. It starts years earlier, in laboratories and offices scattered across the United States, in a secret program that employed more than 125,000 people and cost $2 billion. The program was called the Manhattan Project, and its goal was to build a weapon that had never existed before: an atomic bomb. The physics behind the bomb came from European scientists, many of them refugees from Nazi Germany. Albert Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt in 1939, warning that Germany might be developing an atomic weapon and urging the United States to begin its own research. Roosevelt approved funding. The program grew from a small research effort into the largest secret military project in American history. By 1944, the scientists at Los Alamos, New Mexico, led by physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, had designed two types of atomic bombs. One used uranium, the other used plutonium. Neither had been tested. Nobody knew for certain if they would work. Nobody knew exactly what would happen if they did. On July 16, 1945, the plutonium bomb was tested in the desert of New Mexico at a site called Trinity. The explosion created a fireball that lit up the sky for miles, melted the sand beneath it into glass, and produced a mushroom cloud that rose 40,000 feet. Oppenheimer later said a line from Hindu scripture came to his mind: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The uranium bomb was not tested. There was only enough enriched uranium for one weapon, and the scientists were confident enough in its design to skip the test. That single untested bomb was Little Boy, and it was loaded onto the Enola Gay on the afternoon of August 5, 1945. Colonel Paul Tibbets was 30 years old. He had been flying combat missions since 1942, leading the first American daylight bombing raid over occupied Europe. He was one of the best pilots in the Army Air Forces. In September 1944, he was pulled aside and told about the Manhattan Project. He was given command of a new unit, the 509th Composite Group, and told to build a team capable of delivering the weapon. He was not told what the weapon was. Not yet. Tibbets handpicked his crew. Tom Ferraby, his bombardier, had flown 63 combat missions in Europe and North Africa. Theodore Van Kirk, his navigator, had been with Tibbets since the early days of the war. They trained for months at Wendover Airfield in the Utah desert, practicing high-altitude drops with oversized dummy bombs. The crews knew they were training for something big. They did not know what. In late May 1945, the 509th moved to Tinian Island, a tiny speck in the western Pacific, about 1,500 miles south of Japan. The unit waited. The scientists waited. The politicians debated. President Harry Truman, who had taken office after Roosevelt's death in April, faced a decision that would define the rest of the 20th century. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered in May. But Japan was still fighting, and the military estimated that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would cost between 500,000 and 1 million Allied casualties. The Japanese military had shown throughout the war that it would fight to the last man. Okinawa, the most recent major battle, had killed more than 12,000 Americans and over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians. Truman approved the use of the atomic bomb. On the night of August 5th, Tibbets named the plane. He painted the words "Enola Gay" on the nose, after his mother. The co-pilot, Captain Robert Lewis, was furious. Lewis had been the Enola Gay's regular aircraft commander and considered the plane his. He arrived at the airfield that morning to find someone else's mother's name on the fuselage. Before takeoff, the flight surgeon, Captain Don Young, handed Tibbets a small cardboard box. Inside were 12 cyanide capsules, one for each crew member. If the plane went down and the crew faced capture, they were to swallow the pills. The secret of the atomic bomb could not fall into enemy hands. At 2:45 a.m. Tinian time, the Enola Gay lifted off. 2 other B-29s accompanied it. The Great Artiste, carrying scientific instruments to measure the blast, and a third plane equipped with cameras. The flight to Japan would take approximately 6 hours. Most of the crew still did not know the nature of the weapon they were carrying. During the flight, Tibbets finally told them. He explained that they were carrying an atomic bomb, a weapon with a force equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. The reaction was silence. Some of the men did not fully understand what that meant. Nobody did. Captain William Parsons, a Navy weapons expert who had helped design the bomb's firing mechanism, crawled into the bomb bay during the flight and armed Little Boy. The decision to arm the bomb in the air, rather than on the ground, had been made after a series of B-29 crashes on takeoff from Tinian. If the Enola Gay crashed with an armed nuclear weapon on board, the island and everyone on it would be gone. As the plane approached Japan, the weather was clear. The primary target was Hiroshima, a city of approximately 350,000 people, home to the headquarters of the Japanese Second Army and several military installations. It had been deliberately spared from conventional bombing so that the effects of the atomic weapon could be accurately assessed. At 8:09 a.m. Japan time, the crew could see the city below through gaps in the cloud cover. Ferriby, the bombardier, locked the Ioi Bridge, a distinctive T-shaped bridge in the center of the city, into his Norden bomb sight. The bomb sight took over, feeding adjustments to the autopilot. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, the bomb bay doors opened and Little Boy fell free. The plane, suddenly 9,700 pounds lighter, lurched upward. Tibbets grabbed the controls and put the Enola Gay into a sharp 155-degree diving turn, pushing the aircraft away from the drop point as fast as physics allowed. Oppenheimer had calculated that they needed to be at least 8 miles from the detonation to survive. Little Boy fell for 43 seconds. It detonated at an altitude of approximately 1,900 feet above the city, about 600 yards in the air. The bomb missed the Ioi Bridge by about 800 feet, exploding almost directly over the Shima Surgical Clinic. In the first millisecond, the temperature at the center of the explosion reached several million degrees. A fireball formed, expanding outward at the speed of light, vaporizing everything within a quarter mile. The thermal pulse radiated across the city, igniting buildings, clothing, and skin. People closest to the hypercenter did not burn. They ceased to exist. Their shadows were flash-burned into concrete and stone, permanent outlines on walls and sidewalks where a human being had stood 1 second earlier. The blast wave followed the heat. Moving at the speed of sound, it flattened buildings in a radius of 1 mile. 2 miles out, wooden structures collapsed. 3 miles out, windows shattered and roofs were torn off. The pressure wave bounced off the ground and reflected back upward, creating a vacuum that pulled debris and fire inward. A firestorm ignited, consuming the oxygen in the air and generating winds of 40 miles per hour that fed the flames. Within minutes, a mushroom cloud had risen to 60,000 feet. From above, the city was invisible beneath a churning mass of black smoke and dust. On the Enola Gay, the crew felt the shockwave hit the aircraft. A sharp jolt, followed by a second and third, like anti-aircraft bursts. Tail gunner George Caron was the only crew member facing backward. He watched the cloud form and described what he saw into a voice recorder. The city had disappeared under a boiling darkness. Tibbets turned the plane around so the crew could see. He later described the scene as a black, boiling nest. He said he did not think about what was happening on the ground. He said you had to be objective about these things. Robert Lewis, the co-pilot, wrote in his flight log, "My God, what have we done?" On the ground, the destruction was beyond any frame of reference. In the first few seconds, an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people died. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Hospitals were destroyed, along with their staffs and patients. Fire stations burned. The city's water mains burst. The few surviving doctors, many of them wounded, tried to treat thousands of people with no medicine, no equipment, and no understanding of what had happened to them. Survivors described a white flash, then heat, then darkness. Many were blinded. Many were burned so severely that their skin hung from their bodies in strips. People stumbled through the rubble, arms outstretched, searching for water. The rivers filled with the dead and dying, people who had crawled to the water's edge seeking relief from the burns. Radiation sickness appeared in the days and weeks that followed. People who had survived the blast and the fire began to develop nausea, hair loss, bleeding gums, and purple spots on their skin. Thousands more died in the weeks after the bombing from radiation exposure. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Hiroshima was estimated at 140,000. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb, the plutonium weapon called Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This bomb killed an estimated 70,000 people. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The crew of the Enola Gay returned to Tinian as heroes. Tibbets was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross the moment he stepped off the plane. The men were celebrated across America. Newspapers printed their names and photographs. Tibbets became one of the most famous military figures of the war. But the aftermath was complicated. As the years passed and the full scale of destruction became clear, the moral weight of Hiroshima settled over the crew in different ways. Some handled it without visible difficulty. Tibbets maintained for the rest of his life that the bombing was necessary, that it saved millions of lives by ending the war without an invasion. He said he slept well at night. He said he had no regrets. Others struggled. Robert Lewis, the co-pilot, spent years dealing with the memory. Navigator Van Kirk said the bomb should never be used again. Some crew members avoided talking about Hiroshima entirely. Tibbets requested that when he died, there be no funeral and no headstone. He did not want a grave that could become a gathering point for protesters or a site of controversy. He died on November 1st, 2007, at the age of 92. His body was cremated and his ashes scattered over the English Channel, far from Hiroshima, far from Tinian, far from the runway where a heavy plane lifted off in the darkness, carrying a weapon that changed the meaning of war. The Enola Gay sits today in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Virginia, fully restored, its silver skin gleaming under museum lights. Visitors walk beneath its wings and read the plaques. Some take photographs, some stand quietly. 8,000 miles away, in Hiroshima, there is a different kind of museum. The Peace Memorial Museum holds artifacts from August 6, 1945. A child's burned tricycle, a lunchbox with its contents fused into charcoal, a wall with a human shadow permanently seared into the stone. Outside, the skeletal dome of the Genbaku building stands as it was left by the blast, a ruin preserved in the center of a rebuilt city. Every year on August 6th, thousands of people gather at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. They release paper lanterns onto the river. The lanterns float downstream, each one carrying the name of someone who did not survive. One plane, one bomb, 43 seconds of freefall, and a world that has never been the same since.